Delighted to be here.
This is a great question that everybody should zone into here. Why aren't the Democrats doing better? We own every branch of government. Mr. Trump has to answer the same thing when they're saying they're all pointing fingers about the government shutting down. For God's sakes, when you control the presidency, the Senate, and the Congress, when government gets shut down, whose fault is it? It's not the Democrats. They don't run anything. The same's true in California. I was the youngest state party officer elected in Democratic Party history. And my grand dream was someday we would control, because California used to be a little Republican-y. You don't have to go that far back to remember Deukmejian and Reagan and so on, Pete Wilson.
And Campbell.
And he was always a secret Democrat.
To please my father.
Yeah. And my dream was that California would someday become a one-party Democratic state. And lo and behold, here we are. And I'll be the first to admit we're not doing that well. And the reason is twofold. One, the Democrats can be just as beholden to their special interests as anybody else. We need to break away from that. And two, we talk way too much about party doctrine and not enough about fixing fundamental things for the people of the state, many of which are completely nonpartisan. And that's why we created the 21st Century Alliance. We want to focus on getting our K through 12 schools big amongst the best in the country. When I came through, and I went to public schools in Menlo Park on Middlefield Avenue for 13 years, at Ansel and MA, we were the top 5 in the country. Today, we're 39th in English, 43rd in math. That is a crime for what is now the wealthiest state in the country by far. And the punchline to all of this is, I don't think one-party rule is the best. I think the more competitive the elections, the better, and that both parties would do well to dial down the partisanship and dial up accountability and performance on basic services, better schools, build more housing so everybody can afford a home, and improve the state's business climate before too many of our other companies leave the state, because that shrinks the pie for all of us. That's what we need to look for as our North Star.
It's not completely accurate to say Washington is one party as much as California is one party, because the Senate has more than 40 Democratic senators. Hence, they have, and that's why we're shut down now. The Senate is filibustering. So polite and respectful disagreement. The dysfunctionality of the state of California is a greater surprise because there's 75% of the state Senate, 75% of the state assembly, and the governor and every other statewide office is held by one party. So you have a check. It's in Washington right now. And that check is the Republicans do not have 67 senators, nor are they likely to. So moving back to California, we really do have a unique dysfunctionality, unlike bad as it is DC, where the two parties right now are showing the ability to stop each other. So with all of this strength, you have to understand the sources of electoral victory. And that is the public employee unions who support the Democratic candidates and will not tolerate dissent. It's conceivable, if your name is Arnold Schwarzenegger and you have 100% name ID already, that you can go up against that kind of a system. But I sadly have come to the conclusion that there is no chance for a Republican to be elected statewide, which means that we've got one of two choices: either get a business sensible Democrat to be our governor, like Steve Wesley, or an independent to be governor, like Steve Wesley. This is, and otherwise, it's going to be run by the public employee unions. And here are a couple of examples. Number one, the schools. And Steve has done such remarkable work. I hope we can talk a little bit about the bill that the governor signed yesterday that you told me about in improving our schools. Why is there opposition to giving available school space to charter schools? So when I was finance director, I had the authority to allocate excess space in government buildings and we allocated it to charter schools and not so anymore. Why is there an opposition to accepting the money, $5 billion across the country, that's available in the one big beautiful bill? I am not an advocate of one big beautiful bill, but the Congress passed it. It is the law. And we have money available in the state of California. Each one of us can contribute $1,700 to a foundation for private schools or charter schools or supplemental programs at public schools, and have it be a credit, not a deduction, but a credit. That is to say, the citizens of New York will help pay for our private charter and enhanced public schools. Why has Sacramento not adopted it? Because excuse me, I wish it were, because Ronald Reagan, I wish it was him. I've obviously got a psychological block. Because President Donald Trump authored it. Now that's just pure giving up something to spite yourself. Why can we not contract out government services? If you wanted to get the most efficient operation of any public service, you would you do the law of comparative advantages, and you would choose the lowest cost quality provider. And the public employee unions will not allow you to do that. Think of Loma Prieta earthquake and think of the Northridge earthquake. The repairs on the Northridge earthquake were over budget and overdue by several years, entirely done by Caltrans. The repairs after Loma Prieta, under budget, under schedule, because Governor Wilson was able to get it bid out. But the public employee unions will not permit that. And in order to get elected on the Democratic side, you have to have the support of the public employee unions. So I'll conclude by saying either adjust that system. Again, as I said, a man with the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger could have done it. He didn't have to have a Republican label. He could have just said Arnold Schwarzenegger, party terminator. Well, it would have been sufficient. But if you don't have that many candidates of that caliber, or let me say qualities, then you have to try to reform the Democratic Party, because the solution is not coming from the Republican Party. It's now irrelevant in the state. Or support a third party. And maybe later on I'll give a few structural suggestions for how we can, well, maybe I'll take 10 seconds more. The law is stacked against third parties. I'll just give you this one. Last example is one numeric example. If you want to contribute to a candidate for the assembly, you can give $5,900 to that candidate. If that candidate, however, is supported by a major party, not an organization trying to become a third party, but a major party, you can give $49,000 plus $5,900, but the $49,000 goes to the state party for the purpose of supporting an individual candidate, and it comes right back. So $49,000 plus $5,900 is $54,900 if you're running as a Democrat or as a Republican. If you're running as an independent, Common Sense Party candidate, for example, which is my party at the moment, $5,900. That's a 9.3 to 1 advantage written in the law, and you're never going to have a viable third party with that kind of disadvantage. So the solutions are, Steve is quite right, it's in the structure of the Democratic Party and how people get ahead in the Democratic Party, and you're never going to change that until you change the funding mechanism or come at it from another party.
So let me jump in on this. A lot of what Tom says I completely agree with is true, but I think there's a lot more hope to reform both parties. Let me give you some examples. All too often, and I think all of you have heard this, the Democratic Party just wants to raise more taxes, and somehow that's going to fix things. And the Republican Party just says government's always terrible and we need to kill it in the bathtub. Neither one of these solutions gets you where you need to be. What we're focused on at the 21st Century Alliance, and this is why we've created this group, which has now gone statewide. So, I mean, you're kind of on the early innings of something that's exciting, is to say, let's focus on best practices for fixing our problems and major issues. Let me give you one concrete example. If you cannot read in 4th grade, your prognosis for the future is very poor because you're not going to do well in chemistry, biology, algebra, or anything else if you're not reading by 4th grade. California has the lowest reading literacy rates, amongst the lowest in the country. And so we looked around at the best practices around the country. This is not a Democratic or Republican organization. We're bipartisan. We are about fixing things. And without a doubt, the states that were doing the best were all doing one thing in common, and that was using what is called the science of reading approach to teaching reading. When I was a kid, it was called phonics. For reasons I won't begin to go into, the teachers union, CTA, opposed it. Virtually every education group in the state came together and said, we need to bring the science of learning to the state of California. We, working with Children Ed Voice and Marshall Tuck, pulled together a statewide organization. We just got this initiative after it was tabled last year at the last minute with over 100 advocacy groups there. They knew we had the votes, and the legislature tabled it. By the way, why? A lot of what Tom said. He was hoping to get support from CTA in his bid for superintendent of public schools. It was tabled without even a vote. We came back this year bigger and more active than ever. We got this initiative passed. It was signed into law literally yesterday. And people said, you're never going to be able to fight the special interests, the public employee unions, the prison guards, the teachers union. And in fact, we did, and we won. And the way we did it is we didn't just stand up and say, here are all the points, we have the logic, we're right. That doesn't win in Sacramento. We have a PAC. We invested in candidates to stand up so they knew someone would have their back. I'm going to tell you a big surprise here. Most of the legislators actually know what the right thing to do is. Why don't they do it? They're scared to death about losing the next election because the special interests, frankly, on both sides of the aisle are pretty darn organized. And you know what? Bully for them. That's what they're supposed to do, is represent their interests. Our job is to make sure that people of good conscience and will are paying attention, or getting out and voting and paying attention to the issues. By the way, Mississippi, the 49th poorest state in the union, adopted the science of reading over a decade ago, and they've gone from the absolute bottom to 21st in the country. They skyrocketed past California, the wealthiest state in the country.
Steve, update, number 9 now.
Mississippi, yeah, number 9.
Number 9.
Think what yay for Mississippi.
Ole Miss.
Think what California can do when we start teaching children the best way possible. If we follow best practices in home building and all these other areas that we need to improve on, just think how bright our future can be. That is what the 21st Century Alliance is making to happen. I find it exciting.
Well, God bless you. And may I ask that your next task be to take on the CTA and allow pay for performance. How about teachers who go into schools that are tough locations, that haven't done well, and pay more the more progress they make? That's contrary to the labor union mentality, which is seniority based. Seniority dominates. CTA's dominance in this field is not simply because they represent so many teachers, most of whom are less political than their leadership, but because the campaign finance laws in California are not even as honest as the federal campaign finance laws. It's a shocking statement.
Let me just highlight 2 things. Really simple. Folks, you're not going to believe this, but in terms of business climate in California, of the 50 states, California ranks 51st because Puerto Rico actually counts 2 and we're below them, according to Business Independent magazine. Year after year, routinely at the bottom. There is no reason for that. Now, I want to get a little bit away from the partisanship. The Republicans love to rail about the public employee unions, and there's a lot of truth to it. Democrats love to rail about big business and big money, and there's truth to that. I want to elevate the discussion beyond the partisanship. I want to focus on results. Let me give you an example. The state of California has a 3 million unit shortfall in housing. A shortfall in housing is the #1 correlate to homelessness. Now, drug addiction, mental illness absolutely contributes to homelessness as well. But the #1 correlate, the reason we have the worst housing problem in the country in places like Houston, it's a remarkably small one. And this is all based on the numbers. It's because we systematically underbuild. Here's part of the answer. We need to build at least 180 to 200,000 new homes a year. We build 70 to 80,000. And you talk to all the Republicans, they say they're for home building. The Democrats say they're for home building. Here's what happens. 2 things hold it back. One is there's a law called CEQA, which in concept was great. It is outdated. It hasn't been updated in 50 years. We were able to get the first major CEQA reform passed, fighting against all the special interests this last year. Second, in every facet of life, and Tom touched on this, if you're a company or whatever you're doing at home, you do competitive bidding, whether it's dry cleaners or the car you buy or a big government contract, and you choose the lowest offer. Who would choose the highest offer? Best value for what you get. State of California has a rather extraordinary law referred to as prevailing wage, where you're required to pay the highest rate. And as a result, you have the highest home cost in the country, almost twice the national average. So we need to tackle those 2 things. Now, the rub is when you tell a Democrat like myself, for most of the ones in the legislature, gee, you just need to take on the building trades and the environmentalists all at once, most of the Democrats have hit the door. We, at the 21st Century Alliance, put together a coalition of well-meaning Democrats, the YIMBY groups, and we got the carpenters even weighed in. They broke with the building trades to pass CEQA reform the first time in 50 years. And I just want you to know, and I'm going to be a little graphic here, Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks is a friend of mine and this woman is about as far to the left as you can get because she represents Berkeley and Richmond and so on. And she just said, I just pissed off all the unions who aren't going to be happy with me in the election, but I just got goddamn tired of seeing too many people in my district sleeping on the streets. Someone had to do something. But she couldn't do it alone. We weighed in. We brought all these other groups, these alliances from around the state. You can change things. So I'm a little more optimistic than my friend and colleague, Tom. Absolutely, he's identifying a lot of the problems. But if you get together, you organize, you have a PAC, you educate the legislators, we have had win after win that no one thought possible, and we're going to keep right on doing it.
By the time you pay the impact fees, affordable housing is no longer affordable. So after we limited property tax in Prop 13 in the state of California, the localities had to come up with alternative revenue sources, and they were called impact fees. And those who, there may be some developers in our audience tonight, they may know more about this than I. By the time you have paid the impact fees, you cannot build a unit and sell it at a profit that can be a price afforded by the people you intended to help. Since the jumping off point for this question was, if you have single party control, why aren't you doing better? Here's a really good suggestion. Get a strong, business sensible, compassionate governor who happens to be of the majority party. Have her bring together all other Democrats, city council members, mayors, supervisors, and say, we're going to do what Houston did 25 years ago. We're going to give you a one-stop shop for affordable housing. You come to my office and we sign the permits all at once. Pete Wilson had the idea. It was called Red Teams. Mayor of Houston had the idea. It was called One Stop Shop. And you can do that within one party. You don't have the built-in partisanship of, well, if I give you this, then your party will look better than mine. So I think the housing solution includes a consolidation of authority and the elimination of multiple levels that say no, or at least delay, and say yes and build. Well, let me kick it off this time. I had the honor to represent you all in Washington and in Sacramento. And Sacramento runs a whole lot better. Despite everything that I've been talking about tonight, let me give you a few examples. And maybe this is illustrative of advantages that we can use to help solve California's problems. When I was in the state Senate, there were 28 Democrats and 12 Republicans. No, it was 22 and 18, pardon me. It was much closer. And we hadn't yet changed the budget rules so that you needed 2/3 to pass the budget. Now you only need a majority to pass the budget. And the Democratic leadership of the state Senate, I served there in the minority, were kind to me. Bill Lockyer, David Roberti, maybe some of you remember those names. Yeah. Distinguished gentlemen for whom I have high regard. And they said, work with us and we'll make progress together. I think it was because they are innately good, honest people, but it could also be because they needed my vote. When you have 75%, they don't need your vote. Point one. Point two, in Sacramento, every state senator got to introduce 60 bills, 6-0. Do you know what the limit is on bills that Congress members can introduce? There is no limit. Accordingly, come to me if I was still in Congress at a reception like this, and I could, in all sincerity, take your idea and introduce it as a bill next week when I fly back to Washington. And boy, was I delivering. My bill would never have a hearing, and it would never have a vote. By contrast, every one of the 60 bills that you introduce as a state senator, because it's limited in number, has a hearing and a vote. And so there's buy-in.
Yeah.
And I need your vote on this, and you need my vote on that. And it's something I can see either way. Of course, I'll go your way. So you help me the next time. And that worked. In Sacramento, the governor has a blue pencil. This is the third difference. The governor, therefore, at budget time, can say, no, I'm not giving to the Dairy Goat Subsidy Act for Mendocino County. That goes out. The United States Supreme Court held that the president could not exercise that. A Republican Congress gave that authority to a Democratic president, President Clinton, and the Supreme Court struck it down. As a result, we have take it or leave it budgets, and this stalemate that we have today is evidence of that. And lastly, I still do teach constitutional law. And so let me point out the last advantage that I found in Sacramento. There is an office called the Office of the Legal Counsel. And when you introduce a bill, they send a memo back, not just to you, but to every member of the Senate, saying, here's where we think this bill is constitutional, here's where it's not. And if you don't fix it, it's going to be overturned by the courts. There is no such body in Washington. Hence, one of my colleagues introduced a bill to defund any recipient of National Endowment for the Arts money that shows art that denigrates major religions. I went up to him on the House floor and I said, I always carry a copy of the Constitution with me. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And he said, we'll let the courts worry about it. That never would have gotten to the floor in Sacramento because honest, brilliant people work in the Office of Legal Counsel, and they vet it first to make sure it's constitutional. So with those points in mind, I actually came to the conclusion that a state senator was more effective, unless you happen to be speaker or minority leader.
Let me just add to that briefly. In terms of sheer money, you get so much more bang for your buck helping elect the right people in California than you do in Congress. It is mind-boggling. Second, you should just know, whatever passes in California, every other state legislature is watching us. Most of the other states don't even have professional full-time legislators. They're all looking at what's happening here in New York. These state races, whether it's Assembly or Senate, have magnitude far beyond the scope you would ever dream. It's one of the reasons we're focused here. By the way, just for the Democrats in the group, and we're a bipartisan organization, if you've thought at all about maybe wanting to win that presidential election in 2028, you might give some real thought to having California be a positive showcase for the country, not one that's used as a negative showcase.
Good point.
And I think we can deliver on that.
It's impossible to undo the giving of representation to state employees. But what we can do is eliminate conflict of interest. Let me pursue this at a very important local level. By all means, teachers should be allowed to elect their representatives. I am not going to stand against unionization of teachers. That's the union you want to belong to, vote for it. Two things though. One, don't compel other teachers to join or take dues from them and use it for your purposes that they never agreed to. And number two, eliminate conflict of interest. Do not then allow the bargaining for the teacher's contract with the school district to be carried on by people who had received contributions from the teachers union. This is a straightforward conflict of interest. If I receive contributions from people who are now going to represent those whose contract I am negotiating, I am under a conflict. So the answer is have your union. It can serve a number of important functions, but when it comes to determining the wages, hours, and conditions of employment, that's the phrase in labor law, have it done by a civil service commission. This goes back to Theodore Roosevelt. The Civil Service Commission studies comparable jobs. It's bipartisan. It comes up with recommendations, and the recommendations go into effect to solve the contract issues every time the bargaining comes forward. And those are the steps that I think would make much better.
Let me jump in on this and give one more answer, and then we'll deliver to come back to you. I want to move this from an academic discussion because I've been on so many of these, and we've already had a lot of talk tonight about that. The unions are terrible, and this and that, and the unions interfere at a different event. Big business, they're terrible, and they're underpaying people, and it's shameful what goes on at Walmart or this company or that. There's truth on both sides. I'd argue we need labor unions. You're trying to get common sense policy changes that allow unions, give people the right to collective bargaining, that still makes sense. Let me give you a concrete example of something that happened right here in our state that you may not even be aware of. There was a piece of legislation put forward that would have allowed any worker to go on strike, so striking workers, to get paid unemployment. In other words, everybody would have a huge financial incentive to go out and strike. And by the way, it gets worse. There's an entity in the state government, Tom knows well, it's called EDD. And because they had paid out so much during COVID, they're $19 billion in arrears already. And that's the pot that all the money would have come out of for the striking workers. And we stood up, and all the Democrats were lining up to support it. And we just said, folks, you cannot give everybody on the planet a right to strike and get paid by the state of California from a budget that is already in arrears. And they said, you're never going to stop it. But we did. We went to all of the more moderate Democrats who knew that if they did this, they'd basically be taking money from the education bucket and giving it to this. We got all the Republicans lined up. All the things that Tom said normally don't happen, which is Democrats control everything and they're just going to have their way. We created a common sense center, but we didn't just stand up and say, we're right and here are the facts. It's pretty straightforward, folks. We spent hours on the phone. We had our lobbyists working. We showed up not with Brian and myself and a few other people, but with our 24 alliance groups. That's why we're called the 21st Century Alliance. And we stopped that legislation with support from people like you. And it's why I'm so grateful to see so many of you here. We can make fundamental changes that will make California better. But the punchline is for all of you, you're busy. You've gone out and created the world's fourth largest economy. People like Chris who've done extraordinary things, made us the envy of the world. You may not have time to follow the $2,500 bills that are put forward every year. We will. We'll organize around it. And by the way, don't criticize the teachers union for organizing like crazy. You can criticize them for organizing around the wrong thing, but they're just playing by the rules. It's up to the rest of us to be active and make sure we're paying attention. You may not have time to. We will help make sure we can turn the tide on these key bills more often than not. And if we can do it here, I think we have the ability to take this group nationwide. And I think everybody is looking for a little more common sense and bipartisan statesmanship.
So go to charter schools performance, particularly in New York, particularly in Milwaukee. And I have done my very best to do my homework, so I can tell you the record evidence. Secondly, and this is the libertarian in me, I trust parents. If a parent doesn't have enough money to pay for the parochial school, there's a lot of charitable organizations that can help. If they don't have enough money to pay for the charter school, there's no additional charge to go to a charter school. It is the tuition set by the school district. So that shouldn't be a preclusion, but it might be for a private school and a parochial school, even though that is the least expensive of them. In which case, empower the parents. And if you give them a choice, let them exercise the choice. What I strongly oppose, what I strongly disapprove of, is efforts to say no more charter schools. There's a cap on charter schools in California. And gratefully, we haven't hit the cap. But there's an actual enacted cap that we can't have anymore, even though parents might want to choose. So why do we have the best higher education in the country? The point with which I began, because we've got competition and individual choice. That's what I'd like to see at the K through 12 level. Charter schools are a public school, so it's already within the public school system. What it does, though, is allow the parents to negotiate their own contract and not be bound by the district-wide contract. So a charter school is a oftentimes, almost always, a non-union public school. It is a public school. Parents prefer that for their kids. I'm with the parents.
You just had a thought or two. I generally support charter schools because I like to see competition. And they serve as, I think, laboratories for testing new ideas that you can't always do in the public schools. But that does not mean every charter school is a good school. Ultimately, what really matters is accountability. Is the school teaching the kids or is it not? And charter schools must be held to the same high standards. There are a lot of religious charter schools and rural charter schools that just aren't performing. You need to teach science in schools, not religion per se. I think if there's one North Star here, there's a guy, and I urge all of you to take a look. His name is Jeffrey Canada, who has the Harlem School Project. And what he would say is the North Star in education is high expectations, and how close can you get to getting there? Anybody who's doing that is the entity we need to be behind. I'll just leave you with one last thought here. The most radical labor activist in the teachers union is a guy named Albert Shanker of the American Federation of Teachers from New York. And he was always striking and bombastic and became a national figure. And he stood up after 30 years and famously said, if I'd known today if I'd known 30 years ago what I know today, I would not have been fighting so hard to make teaching a trade. I would have been fighting harder to raise our standards for teachers and make it a profession and pay them accordingly. And I just would leave you with that different paradigm shift. I think there's some wisdom in that. On this issue of government, again, we can spend all our time saying unions are terrible, or the big business does terrible stuff, and the truth to both. The reality is we need to get back to effective government. That's what we're about. The longer I've been involved in politics, the more I've realized the less partisan you are, the more stuff you're likely to get done.